The Pacific Theater, spanning from 1942 to 1945, presented a unique battlefield environment. The dense, verdant jungle canopy of the Pacific Islands fostered combat scenarios where engagements frequently occurred at distances under 30 yards. Within these challenging conditions, the United States Marine Corps introduced a firearm that would fundamentally challenge the prevailing assumptions of Japanese forces regarding modern warfare: the 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. While comprehensive historical records detailing its specific combat utilization remain somewhat scarce, the presence of Winchester Model 1897 and Model 1912 shotguns within Marine units throughout the Pacific Campaign signified a tactical capability for which Japanese military doctrine had made no allowance. The Imperial Japanese Army had dedicated decades to preparing for conflict with Western powers. Their instructional materials meticulously addressed British rifles, American machine guns, French mortars, and Soviet submachine guns. However, shotguns, which they viewed primarily as implements for avian sport rather than instruments of war, were conspicuously absent from their tactical considerations. This oversight would prove to be of significant consequence, as American forces incorporated approximately 25,000 Model 97 and between 60,000 and 80,000 Model 12 shotguns into military service during the Second World War. In 1942, Japanese military doctrine was fundamentally rooted in the cultivation of spiritual fortitude, intended to surmount any material disadvantages. This philosophy was not merely rhetorical, but represented a deliberate response to Japan's industrial limitations. The annual steel production of Japan was less than what America could achieve in a single month. The Imperial Army's strategic solution was to elevate each soldier's proficiency in close-quarters combat, believing that spirit and rigorous training would triumph over mechanized warfare. The practical application of this doctrine manifested in nighttime infiltration attacks, culminating in close-quarters engagements utilizing rifles and bayonets. Japanese infantry underwent extensive training in these tactics, which had previously proven effective against Chinese forces, British troops in Malaya, and American defenders in the Philippines. The standard operational sequence was clearly defined: approach under the veil of darkness, penetrate enemy lines, and then overwhelm the defenders at close range, where Japanese superiority in hand-to-hand combat was expected to be decisive. American shotguns effectively nullified this entire tactical framework. At the very close ranges where Japanese doctrine anticipated dominance, a Marine armed with a Winchester Model 97 could discharge 6 loads of double-aught buckshot in approximately 2 seconds, leveraging the weapon's distinctive slam fire capability. Each shell contained 9 pellets, each measuring .33 caliber, creating a shot pattern that rendered missing an enemy nearly impossible amidst the dense jungle vegetation. The Winchester Model 1897, a design conceived by John Browning and refined over 45 years of production, served as the primary shotgun for Marines in the initial Pacific campaigns. The military variant featured a 20-inch barrel, a perforated heat shield, and a bayonet lug compatible with the M1917 sword bayonet. Critically, the Model 97 lacked a trigger disconnector, enabling continuous firing by maintaining pressure on the trigger while operating the pump action. The Model 1912, developed by Winchester engineer T.C. Johnson, represented an enhancement of Browning's design, incorporating an internal hammer mechanism that significantly reduced the risk of accidental discharge. By 1943, the Model 12 had largely superseded the Model 97 in Marine Corps units, although both weapons continued to be utilized throughout the war. Military procurement records indicate consistent production, although specific numbers related to combat deployment remain undocumented. The ammunition fired by these weapons proved to be as critical as the firearms themselves. Standard double-aught buckshot loads contain 9 pellets, each weighing 53.88 grains, and measuring 8.38 millimeters in diameter. At 10 yards, the shot pattern spread to approximately 10 inches. At 20 yards, it expanded to 20 inches, and at 30 yards to 30 inches. In the close confines of jungle warfare, where visibility rarely extended beyond 30 yards, this expanding pattern compensated for the inherent difficulties in precise aiming within dense foliage. The Guadalcanal campaign, which spanned from August 1942 to February 1943, marked the initial major American offensive in the Pacific. Marines of the 1st Division landed with a variety of armaments, including some shotguns, though their precise numbers and deployment are not explicitly recorded in official battle reports. The Battle of the Tenarue River, more accurately known as Alligator Creek, on August 21, 1942, resulted in the virtual annihilation of Colonel Kona Ichiki's detachment of 917 men, with 789 Japanese soldiers killed. While this engagement features prominently in historical accounts of the Pacific War, primary sources attribute the heavy Japanese casualties predominantly to the effectiveness of Browning M1917 water-cooled machine guns and 37mm anti-tank guns firing canister rounds, with only passing mention of shotgun involvement. Throughout the Guadalcanal campaign, Marines employed shotguns primarily for perimeter security and jungle patrols. Photographic evidence depicts point men carrying Winchester shotguns during patrol operations, positioned to react swiftly to ambushes in the challenging jungle terrain. However, after-action reports overwhelmingly emphasize machine guns, rifles, and artillery as the principal weapon systems influencing battle outcomes. The jungle environment of Guadalcanal presented unique challenges for all weaponry, but particularly for shotguns. The standard paper case shotgun shells readily absorbed moisture in the humid conditions, swelling to such an extent that they would not chamber correctly. This issue persisted throughout the Pacific campaign until the eventual adoption of brass case shells. The pervasive humidity of the Pacific Islands created a critical ammunition problem that nearly negated the effectiveness of shotguns. Standard commercial shotgun shells utilized paper hulls, which absorbed moisture and swelled significantly in the 100% humidity common in jungle environments. Shells that chambered easily under dry conditions became impossible to load after exposure to tropical dampness. Marines reported instances where shells swelled so severely that they had to be hammered into the chambers, a completely impractical scenario during combat. This crisis endured until March 29, 1945, when the military officially sanctioned the all-brass M19 shell, designated shell shotgun brass, 12-gauge, numbered double-aught buck, M19. These moisture-resistant brass casings restored shotgun reliability for the concluding months of the war. The late adoption date helps explain why many Pacific veterans rarely mentioned shotguns in their memoirs. For the majority of the war, ammunition-related difficulties severely hampered their effectiveness. The United States military formalized shotgun training through Technical Manual TM9-285, published on September 21, 1942. This manual covered the Winchester models 97 and 12, Remington Model 11, Stevens Models 520 and 620, and Ithaca Model 37. Marine training exercises took place at Camp Pendleton, California, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and Parris Island, South Carolina. The training emphasized specific combat applications, including point security during patrols, rapid engagement in night defense, procedures for clearing caves and bunkers, and duties related to guarding prisoners. Marines were instructed in the Model 97's unique slam-fire technique, though instructors cautioned against over-reliance on this feature due to excessive ammunition consumption and potential barrel overheating. The Marine Corps Table of Organization E-100, effective from 1943, authorized 306 shotguns per Marine division. These weapons were primarily distributed to military police companies, pioneer battalions, and select rifle squads for specialized assignments. This allocation meant that while shotguns were present in every significant Marine operation, they constituted less than 2% of a division's small arms inventory. The historical record reveals a striking omission. Japan never lodged formal diplomatic protests regarding the use of American shotguns, a stark contrast to Germany's September 1918 complaint that shotguns violated the Hague Convention. German protests during the First World War had asserted that shotguns caused unnecessary suffering and threatened to execute captured Americans found carrying them. Captured Japanese military documents from during and after the war make no specific reference to shotguns requiring special countermeasures. Training materials focused on countering American firepower broadly, including machine guns, artillery, and flamethrowers, but never identified shotguns as demanding specific tactical responses. This absence suggests that while individual Japanese soldiers undoubtedly encountered shotgun fire, the weapons never achieved sufficient tactical impact to warrant official attention. Post-war interrogations of Japanese officers similarly lack references to shotguns as particularly problematic weapons. Officers discussed American material superiority, overwhelming firepower, and effective combined arms tactics, but shotguns do not appear in these assessments. This silence in official documentation stands in marked contrast to the extensive Japanese records concerning countermeasures against American flamethrowers, which did prompt specific tactical adaptations. The New Guinea Campaign, from 1942 to 1945, saw both Army and Marine units operating in some of the war's most arduous terrain. The 32nd and 41st Infantry Divisions requested shotguns based on the experiences of Marines at Guadalcanal, the dense jungle of New Guinea, where visibility was often measured in single-digit yards, theoretically presented ideal conditions for shotgun deployment. However, the same ammunition problems that plagued Marines at Guadalcanal proved even more severe in New Guinea's highlands. The combination of relentless rain, river crossings, and extreme humidity rendered paper-hulled shells almost completely unreliable. Units that had requested shotguns frequently left them in rear areas, opting instead for M1 Garands, Thompson submachine guns, and Browning automatic rifles. The Army's experience in New Guinea demonstrated that weapons theoretically effective on paper did not always translate into practical combat effectiveness. While shotguns excelled in training exercises and controlled environments, the harsh realities of jungle warfare exposed critical limitations that would not be resolved until the arrival of brass ammunition in 1945. As the Pacific War progressed, Marine units developed specific tactical doctrines for shotgun deployment. These weapons proved most valuable in three distinct roles: point security during patrols, perimeter defense against infiltration, and prisoner guard duties. For patrol operations, designated scouts carried shotguns as the lead elements, prepared to counter ambushes with immediate, devastating firepower. The spreading pattern of buckshot could suppress multiple enemy positions simultaneously, allowing the patrol to maneuver while the point man maintained fire superiority. This tactic necessitated extensive training and a high degree of trust among team members as the shotgunner operated well ahead of mutual support. Nighttime perimeter defense represented another specialized application. Marines positioned shotgunners at likely infiltration points, where the weapon's spread pattern compensated for poor visibility. The distinctive sound of a pump-action shotgun being cycled served as both a warning and a psychological deterrent to infiltrators. However, the limited ammunition capacity meant that shotgunners required immediate rifle support once engaged. The return to the Philippines in October 1944 saw the 6th Army request substantial shotgun allocations for urban combat in Manila. However, Marine participation in the ground campaign in the Philippines was minimal, largely confined to artillery support and air operations. The Army's 37th Infantry Division, which bore the brunt of the fighting in Manila, employed shotguns in house-to-house combat, although after-action reports emphasize flamethrowers and demolition charges as the primary weapons for reducing Japanese strongpoints. The urban combat in Manila highlighted both the capabilities and limitations of shotguns. In room-clearing operations, shotguns provided devastating close-range firepower. However, Japanese defenders rapidly learned to barricade themselves in positions that prevented close approach, effectively negating the shotgun's advantage. The weapons proved most effective in surprise encounters rather than in deliberate assault operations. The February 1945 invasion of Iwo Jima theoretically saw 3 Marine divisions fielding 918 authorized shotguns. However, the island's volcanic ash, extensive tunnel systems, and heavily fortified positions created combat conditions where shotguns played a negligible role. The iconic flag raising on Mount Suribachi occurred after flamethrower and demolition teams had cleared Japanese positions, not as a result of shotgun assaults. Marine units at Iwo Jima primarily utilized flamethrowers for cave clearing, with specialized flame tanks providing support. The M2-2 flamethrower could project burning fuel up to 40 yards into cave complexes, far exceeding the range of a shotgun. Of the 26,000 American casualties at Iwo Jima, existing records attribute none specifically to a lack of shotgun firepower or failures in shotgun tactics. The adoption of brass ammunition arrived too late to significantly impact Iwo Jima operations. The M19 brass shells reached some units in late March 1945, after the battle's conclusion. This timing meant that Marines at Iwo Jima still struggled with swollen paper shells, further limiting shotgun employment in one of the war's most intense battles. The April to June 1945 Battle of Okinawa saw the complete implementation of lessons learned throughout the Pacific Campaign. The 1st and 6th Marine Divisions theoretically fielded 612 authorized shotguns, now supplied with reliable brass ammunition. However, the character of the battle, fought largely in open terrain against entrenched defensive positions, offered limited opportunities for shotgun employment. The Japanese 32nd Army on Okinawa had adopted a defense-in-depth strategy, eschewing the banzai charges that had characterized earlier battles. Japanese forces occupied fortified positions within the Shuri Line, engaging from bunkers and cave systems that kept American infantry at extended ranges. In these circumstances, Marine units relied predominantly on coordinated tank infantry tactics, with flamethrower tanks providing close support. Where shotguns did see use on Okinawa was in the final stages of position reduction, when Marine squads cleared surviving Japanese soldiers from captured fortifications. The weapons also served military police units managing the massive movement of civilian populations. However, these applications, while important, represented a small fraction of the overall combat effort. Despite extensive documentation of Second World War combat, specific accounts of shotgun employment remain surprisingly rare. The Library of Congress, Veterans History Project, contains thousands of Pacific War interviews, yet mentions of shotgun combat are scarce. The National Museum of the Pacific War holds over 4,000 oral histories, but detailed shotgun combat accounts are nearly absent. Eugene Sledge's memoir, With the Old Breed, considered one of the most profound Pacific War narratives, never mentions shotguns, despite his service in a rifle company at Peleliu and Okinawa. Robert Leckey's Helmet for My Pillow similarly omits discussion of shotguns, despite his service with the 1st Marine Division at Guadalcanal. These omissions from detailed and comprehensive memoirs suggest that shotguns played more peripheral than central roles in the Marine combat experience. The few available references describe shotguns as valuable for specific situations, but not as primary combat weapons. Veterans recall appreciating shotguns for nighttime security and jungle ambushes, but emphasize rifles, machine guns, and mortars as the weapons that determined battle outcomes. This perspective aligns with official records indicating that shotguns constituted less than 2% of a division's armament. American industry produced substantial quantities of military shotguns during the Second World War. Winchester manufactured approximately 25,000 Model 97s and between 60,000 and 80,000 Model 12s for military contracts. Remington, Stevens, and Ithaca contributed additional thousands. This production capacity demonstrated American industrial might, but it does not necessarily translate directly to combat employment. Many shotguns served in training facilities, guard units, and rear area security roles rather than in frontline combat. The military police required shotguns for prisoner management and convoy security. Navy vessels carried shotguns for boarding operations and security duties. Air bases employed shotguns for perimeter defense. These necessary but non-combat roles absorbed a significant portion of the production. The disconnect between production figures and combat accounts suggests that, while America possessed the industrial capacity to equip every Marine squad with shotguns, practical limitations, ammunition issues, tactical constraints, and doctrinal preferences meant that most remained in secondary roles. The shotgun served as a specialized tool rather than a standard combat weapon. To comprehend the shotgun's actual role in Pacific combat, a comparison with other weapons proves instructive. The M2 flamethrower, introduced in 1943, appears in virtually every account of cave and bunker clearing. Marines at Iwo Jima expended 27,000 gallons of flamethrower fuel, with detailed records of its effectiveness. In contrast, records of shotgun ammunition expenditure remain conspicuously absent from the same reports. The Browning Automatic Rifle, or BAR, served as the base of fire for the Marine Squad, with extensive documentation of its deployment and effectiveness. Every Marine rifle squad included 3 BAR teams by 1944, with detailed training programs and tactical doctrine. Shotguns, despite their theoretical authorization, never achieved similar doctrinal integration or combat documentation. Even the relatively rare M1918 Browning machine gun generated more combat accounts than shotguns. Veterans describe specific instances of Browning gun employment, ammunition consumption, and tactical impact. The absence of similar shotgun accounts suggests that their actual combat use remained limited, despite official authorization and production numbers. The disconnect between shotgun mythology and historical reality reflects broader patterns in Second World War historiography. Popular culture, influenced by films and sensationalized accounts, has elevated certain weapons beyond their actual significance. The shotgun, with its dramatic visual impact and devastating close-range effect, naturally attracted such mythologizing. Post-war films depicted Marines clearing Japanese positions with shotguns, creating enduring public impressions unsupported by primary sources. Video games and popular histories have perpetuated these images, establishing shotguns as iconic Pacific War weapons, despite the limited documentation of their actual employment. This process of myth-making obscures the more mundane reality of their primarily auxiliary roles. The mythology serves narrative purposes, providing dramatic close combat encounters and technological contrasts between American and Japanese forces. However, historical accuracy requires acknowledging that, while shotguns were present and occasionally effective, they never achieved the tactical significance of rifles, machine guns, mortars, or flamethrowers in determining battle outcomes. The few documented veteran accounts of shotgun use offer valuable insights into their practical deployment. Marines who carried shotguns recall them as useful for specific situations, but burdensome for general combat. The weapon's weight, limited ammunition capacity, and specialized role meant that many preferred rifles for routine operations. A Marine veteran interviewed in 1985 recalled carrying a Model 97 on Guadalcanal. He stated, "It was good for night watch and jungle paths, but you couldn't engage at range. When the shooting started, you wanted a rifle." This practical assessment reflects the weapon's limitations in diverse combat scenarios. Shotguns excelled in their niche, but could not serve as primary armament. Another veteran from the 2nd Marine Division described shotgun allocation. "Each squad was supposed to have one," he recalled, "but half the time it stayed with the company gear, too specialized for everyday use." This comment illustrates the gap between official authorization and practical employment. Units possessed shotguns, but often found rifles more versatile for routine operations. The introduction of brass-cased M19 ammunition in March of 1945 was intended to resolve the persistent moisture-related failures that had plagued shotguns throughout the Pacific theater. However, this innovation arrived too late to exert any meaningful influence on ongoing combat engagements. By that March, Iwo Jima had been pacified, and the invasion of Okinawa was mere weeks away. The Philippine campaign had largely concluded, and remaining hostilities in the Pacific were being conducted using established military doctrines. The brass-cased cartridges did, however, prove useful for occupation duties and in preparation for the planned invasion of Japan. Military strategists formulating Operation Downfall had requested substantial quantities of shotguns for urban warfare scenarios anticipated within Japanese cities. The subsequent deployment of atomic weapons rendered this specific requirement obsolete, leaving the combat effectiveness of the brass-cased ammunition largely untested. Post-war evaluations indicated that the brass ammunition would have significantly enhanced shotgun performance had it been available earlier. Nevertheless, such hypothetical considerations cannot alter the factual historical record. Throughout the majority of the Pacific War, shotguns were hampered by critical reliability issues with their ammunition, severely curtailing their battlefield utility. The absence of specific Japanese defensive measures against shotguns provides crucial historical context. Japanese forces had devised detailed responses to various American weaponry that profoundly impacted combat operations. These included overhead cover against mortars, camouflaged emplacements against tanks, and reverse-slope defenses against naval artillery. The lack of comparable countermeasures for shotguns suggests they never attained a similar level of tactical significance. The evolution of Japanese tactics during the Pacific War was primarily geared towards counteracting American material superiority through astute terrain utilization and the establishment of defensive depth. The transition from coastal defenses to inland fortifications, the development of intricate tunnel networks, and the eventual cessation of suicidal banzai charges were all responses to American firepower in general, rather than to specific weapons, like shotguns. Post-war Japanese military analyses meticulously examined American tactics and armaments, yet scarcely mentioned shotguns. These studies detailed American artillery coordination, naval gunfire support, and the integration of tanks with infantry. The omission of shotgun analysis from otherwise comprehensive examinations suggests their negligible impact on Japanese strategic thinking. One of the most revealing aspects of the shotgun's wartime narrative is the complete void of statistical data. World War II generated vast quantities of information, including ammunition expenditure, casualty correlations, and studies on weapon effectiveness. Yet, no dependable statistics exist that link the deployment of shotguns to enemy casualties or battlefield outcomes. The Operational Research Section, responsible for assessing weapon efficacy throughout the conflict, produced in-depth studies on artillery, mortars, and small arms. These reports quantified probabilities of hitting targets, casualty rates, and ammunition efficiency. No analogous studies concerning shotguns can be found in the archives, implying insufficient combat deployment to yield statistically meaningful results. Even informal estimations are conspicuously absent from official records. Servicemen readily provided approximations for rifle rounds expended, grenades detonated, or mortar shells fired. Similar figures for shotguns do not appear in memoirs or interviews. This statistical deficit indicates that shotguns remain peripheral to major combat operations, despite their official presence within Marine Corps units. The extensive shotgun training provided at Marine camps fostered expectations that combat experience ultimately failed to meet. Marines practiced slam-fire techniques, engaged in simulated jungle shooting scenarios, and qualified with both buckshot and slugs. This training suggested that shotguns would play a substantial role in combat. However, the realities of combat diverged significantly from training simulations. The controlled environments of Camp Pendleton did not replicate the oppressive humidity of Guadalcanal or the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima. Training targets did not retaliate or necessitate engagements at extended distances. The close-quarters engagements that were central to training proved far less frequent in actual combat than anticipated. This disparity between training emphasis and combat utilization mirrors other World War II experiences. Bayonet training consumed considerable time, despite minimal actual combat involving bayonets. Preparations for chemical warfare proved unnecessary, as gas attacks never materialized. Similarly, shotgun training prepared Marines for combat scenarios that rarely unfolded as expected. The logistical complexities associated with shotgun ammunition supply further constrained its battlefield deployment. Each 12-gauge shell weighed approximately twice as much as a rifle cartridge while occupying 3 times the volume. A Marine could carry 80 rounds of rifle ammunition within the space and weight equivalent to just 36 shotgun shells. Supply vessels prioritized rifle ammunition, machine gun belts, and mortar shells over specialized shotgun loads. The limited cargo capacity of landing craft meant that every ammunition case had to be rigorously justified. Shotgun shells, serving specialized roles, received a lower priority than general-purpose ammunition. These logistical realities resulted in ammunition supplies remaining scarce, even when shotguns were available. Veterans recall receiving only 1 or 2 boxes of shells that had to suffice for entire operations. This scarcity discouraged liberal use, further diminishing the shotgun's combat impact below their theoretical potential. Military planners had anticipated that shotguns would excel in urban warfare, prompting requests for increased allocations prior to the battles for Manila and Naha. The confined spaces, short engagement ranges, and room-clearing requirements seemed ideally suited for shotgun deployment. However, actual urban combat revealed unforeseen limitations. Japanese defenders in Manila and Naha established kill zones that prevented close approaches. Barricaded positions, overlapping fields of fire, and booby traps forced American forces to engage at ranges exceeding the effective distance of shotguns. The devastating firepower that theoretically made shotguns ideal for urban combat proved irrelevant when Marines could not close to effective range. In instances where close-quarters urban combat did occur, veterans reported utilizing grenades, Thompson submachine guns, and flamethrowers rather than shotguns. These alternative weapons offered comparable close-range effectiveness with greater versatility. The Thompson submachine gun's magazine capacity of 30 rounds far surpassed the shotgun's 6 rounds, proving crucial in sustained engagements. While shotguns left a minimal documented impression on Japanese military thought, they achieved a disproportionate cultural significance within American military mythology. The imagery of a Marine wielding a trench gun while clearing Japanese positions became iconic, despite a limited historical foundation. This cultural impact vastly exceeds the weapon's actual combat contribution. The shotgun came to symbolize American pragmatism, representing the utilization of hunting implements for military purposes, irrespective of European military conventions. This narrative resonated with the American self-perception as practical innovators unburdened by traditional military thinking. The mythology served propaganda objectives, even if the combat reality proved considerably more complex. Japanese military culture prioritized rifles, machine guns, and artillery as legitimate military weapons, never incorporating shotguns into their conceptualization of warfare. This cultural blind spot supposedly left them unprepared. However, the historical record suggests their lack of preparation stemmed from the shotgun's limited actual deployment rather than any oversight. The narrative of the shotgun illustrates the intricate relationship between technological advancement and military doctrine. The weapons themselves functioned as designed, proving devastating at close range with a spreading pattern ideal for jungle environments. However, their successful utilization necessitated specific tactical conditions that rarely materialized in actual combat. Marine Corps doctrine evolved throughout the Pacific War, but shotguns never achieved full integration into tactical systems. They remained supplementary weapons for particular circumstances rather than integral components of squad firepower. This doctrinal marginalization reflected practical combat experience rather than inherent technological limitations. The contrast with the successful integration of other weapons offers a valuable lesson. The bar became central to Marine Corps squad tactics, with detailed doctrine governing its deployment. The flamethrower revolutionized bunker clearing, prompting extensive tactical development. Shotguns, despite their theoretical potential, never spurred similar doctrinal evolution. Military administrative records provide another perspective on shotgun deployment. Requisitions, repair reports, and requests for replacements document patterns of weapon usage. Parts for rifles and machine guns appear consistently in supply records, indicating heavy utilization. Requests for shotgun parts, conversely, remain remarkably rare, suggesting minimal wear from combat engagement. Armorer reports from Marine divisions show similar trends. Rifles and machine guns required constant maintenance due to combat wear. Shotguns primarily needed cleaning to address storage corrosion rather than wear from firing. These maintenance patterns indicate that most shotguns spent more time in armories than on the front lines. Ammunition requisitions tell a similar story. Divisions requested millions of rifle rounds and hundreds of thousands of machine gun rounds for operations. Shotgun shell requests were modest, often intended for training rather than combat consumption. These administrative records corroborate the limited combat deployment suggested by veteran testimonies. The experiences of other nations offer context for evaluating American shotgun usage. British and Australian forces in the Pacific possessed very few shotguns, relying instead on rifles and submachine guns for jungle warfare. Their combat effectiveness without shotguns suggests the weapons were not essential for success in Pacific combat. Soviet forces, fighting in diverse terrains from urban Stalingrad to rural Kursk, never adopted combat shotguns despite their massive production of small arms. Chinese forces, engaged in close-quarters combat throughout their war with Japan, similarly did not employ shotguns, despite a desperate need for effective weaponry. This international perspective suggests that shotguns represented one tactical option among many, rather than an indispensable combat capability. Nations achieved comparable combat outcomes through different combinations of weaponry, indicating that the shotgun's tactical impact remained marginal despite American production capacity. Post-war military assessments evaluated World War II armaments for future conflicts. The Army's Infantry Board conducted extensive studies to determine which weapons warranted continued development. Rifles, machine guns, mortars, and recoilless rifles received priority. Shotguns garnered minimal attention, suggesting their World War II performance did not justify significant investment. The Korean War saw limited shotgun deployment despite extensive close-quarters combat. Marines in Korea carried M1 Garands, BARs, and carbines rather than shotguns for patrol duties. This practical choice by combat veterans of the Pacific War underscores their assessment of the shotgun's actual versus theoretical utility. Vietnam would witness a resurgence in shotgun use, particularly modified commercial models for jungle patrols. However, even in Vietnam's close-range combat environments, shotguns remained specialized weapons for pointmen and tunnel rats rather than standard armaments. This pattern persists today, with shotguns serving specific military functions rather than general combat roles. The historical record supports several conclusions regarding Japanese encounters with American shotguns during World War II. Firstly, while shotguns were present during campaigns, their actual combat employment was constrained by ammunition limitations and doctrinal preferences. The adoption of brass ammunition in March of 1945 occurred too late to significantly influence combat operations. Secondly, Japanese forces never developed specific countermeasures against shotguns because these weapons never achieved sufficient tactical impact to warrant dedicated attention. The absence of any references to shotguns in Japanese military documents, training materials, and post-war analyses indicates their minor role in shaping combat outcomes. Japanese tactical evolution responded to American firepower in general, rather than to specific weapons like shotguns. Thirdly, the discrepancy between authorized shotgun numbers and documented combat deployment reveals the gap between theoretical capability and practical utility. While Marine divisions were authorized 306 shotguns each, the majority remained in secondary capacities such as guard duty, training, and rear area security rather than frontline combat. Veteran accounts, when mentioning shotguns at all, describe them as useful for specific situations, but not as primary combat weapons. Fourthly, the mythology surrounding Pacific War shotguns far exceeds their documented historical impact. Popular culture has elevated shotguns to an iconic status, despite limited primary source evidence of their combat effectiveness. This myth-making obscures the more mundane reality that rifles, machine guns, mortars, and flamethrowers were the decisive factors in battlefield outcomes. While shotguns filled specialized niches, the shotgun narrative offers broader lessons regarding military innovation and adaptation. Technological capability alone does not guarantee tactical impact. Weapons must be integrated into doctrine, logistics, and training to achieve battlefield effectiveness. Shotguns possess theoretical advantages but failed to overcome practical limitations that restricted their deployment. The Japanese military's failure to anticipate shotguns proved inconsequential because shotguns never achieved the tactical impact necessary to exploit this oversight. Their lack of preparation reflected an accurate assessment of the shotgun's marginal role rather than a critical oversight. The weapons that truly determined the outcomes of Pacific War battles, artillery, naval gunfire, aircraft, and flamethrowers, received appropriate attention from the Japanese. American industrial capacity to produce thousands of military shotguns demonstrated manufacturing prowess, but this did not directly translate into combat power. The ability to manufacture weapons outstripped the ability to employ them effectively in the Pacific's challenging conditions. This disconnect between production and deployment illustrates that industrial might alone does not guarantee a tactical advantage. The encounter between Japanese infantry and American shotguns in World War II ultimately illuminates more about military mythology than about actual combat. While shotguns were present and occasionally effective in specific scenarios, they never achieved the devastating tactical impact that popular accounts suggest. Japanese forces were indeed unprepared for shotguns. However, this unpreparedness proved largely irrelevant because shotguns played marginal roles in determining battle outcomes. The verified historical record, encompassing production figures, training manuals, and organizational charts, confirms the presence of shotguns within Marine Corps units. Nevertheless, the absence of detailed combat accounts, statistical documentation, and Japanese countermeasures indicates limited actual deployment. Veterans who carried shotguns recall them as specialized tools useful in particular situations, rather than as primary combat weapons that altered the course of battles. The March of 1945, introduction of brass ammunition resolved the critical moisture issue, but arrived too late to influence major Pacific engagements. By the time reliable ammunition became accessible, the war was largely decided through island-hopping campaigns that relied on combined arms tactics, overwhelming firepower, and naval supremacy rather than close-quarters shotgun encounters. The Japanese military's lack of a specific response to shotguns reflected an accurate tactical assessment rather than a critical oversight. They correctly focused on countering the American weapons that actually determined battlefield outcomes: artillery, naval gunfire, aircraft, and flamethrowers. Their perceived close-range superiority never achieved sufficient tactical impact to warrant dedicated countermeasures. Modern military forces continue to employ shotguns for specialized purposes, such as door breaching, deploying less lethal ammunition, and in specific close-quarters situations. This limited contemporary usage aligns more closely with their actual World War II deployment than popular mythology suggests. The weapons serve important but narrow functions rather than acting as primary combat arms. The transformation of limited historical reality into widespread popular mythology illustrates how war narratives evolve beyond their factual underpinnings. The dramatic image of Marines clearing Japanese positions with shotguns appeals to narrative needs that historical accuracy does not fulfill. The mythology serves cultural purposes, demonstrating American pragmatism, technological adaptability, and combat innovation. Even if the historical record presents a more mundane picture, understanding the actual role of shotguns in Pacific War combat requires distinguishing verified history from accumulated mythology. The weapons were present, authorized, and occasionally effective, but never achieved the tactical significance that would justify their prominent position in popular Pacific War narratives. Japanese infantry may never have anticipated the presence of 12-gauge American shotguns during assaults, but this surprise proved largely inconsequential to battle outcomes determined by superior American firepower, logistics, and combined arms. Tactics. The verified history presents a less dramatic but more accurate account. Shotguns served as specialized weapons for particular circumstances, hampered by ammunition issues until late in the war, primarily employed in secondary roles, and never achieving sufficient tactical impact to significantly influence Pacific War outcomes. This reality may lack the dramatic appeal of mythology, but it represents the historical truth that emerges from careful examination of primary sources, veteran accounts, and military records. Ultimately, the story of Japanese forces encountering American shotguns reveals as much about military myth-making as about actual combat. The weapons achieved a cultural significance that transcended their tactical impact, becoming symbols of American pragmatism and firepower despite limited documented use. This disconnect between mythology and reality serves as a reminder that popular military history often prioritizes dramatic narratives over mundane historical truth. The Japanese infantry, who never expected 12-gauge American shotguns in the assault, were correct to be surprised by their presence, but mistaken to fear their impact. The weapons that truly defeated Japanese forces in the Pacific, overwhelming industrial production, superior logistics, coordinated combined arms, and relentless naval power, proved far more decisive than the occasional blast of buckshot in the jungle. The shotgun story, when properly understood, illustrates not American tactical innovation through unexpected weaponry, but rather the complex interplay between military capability, combat employment, and historical mythology in the Pacific War.